Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of GCNC Worldview. We're still in the middle of Cannabis by the Numbers, a series of podcasts with Rachel Wright of Verdant Strategies and Beau Whitney from Whitney Economics, where we're digging deep into what actually drives the cannabis industry when you look under the hood from a numbers perspective. And if you haven't caught the first couple of episodes, go check it out. It's available on all of your favorite podcast hosting places. And on this one, we're going to dive into the topic of cannabinoids and what that really means for the industry. I know I spent most of my time 10 years ago sitting in conference rooms listening to people talk to me about the percentage of THC in their flower. And that was kind of it. That was the big defining thing. And now, as time has moved on, we have all kinds of things. We've got THC, CBD, CBG, CBC, THCA, THCV, and a host of others that start with T and C and other things. So, I wanted to dive in, Beau, first. Both of you, welcome. Thanks for joining me again. And Beau, talk to me a little bit from the macro level on what we've been seeing with the discussion of the endocannabinoid system and cannabinoids helping to drive the uptick in the cannabis industry or not. Like, what are you seeing when you're diving into the research and the macroeconomics of all this?
Well, um, well, first of all, thanks for having me again. Really appreciate it. I think that you're doing a valuable service with these educational pieces to the industry. Um,
Thank you.
so, initially when I dove into all of this, I was looking at just the adult use and medical space. And then in 2017, I started looking into hemp, and right around that time, there was the Farm Bill. Um, and so the whole conversation kind of shifted to cannabinoids, right? And we at Whitney Economics view cannabinoids as an ingredient that goes into these different type of products. And so we don't really view it as hemp or yeast or caraway seed or marijuana for your source of cannabinoids. We just see it as an ingredient, right? And so, but there was a lot of talk, especially around the Farm Bill, about, what's the size of all this? And so we look at the total addressable market, which we talked a lot about in our last episode, and we view the US market for adult use and medical at about $100 billion. And as there's price compression, that the value of that market's actually going to decline. Um, what we found for cannabinoids is it's about a 28 to $35 billion market in total. And so that's in addition to adult use and medical. So you've got a pretty sizable market. The adult use and medical relative to hemp cannabinoids is substantially larger, but it's sizable nonetheless. And when you look at these ingredients, the THC market versus CBD, CBG, CBN, and the like, then that's where things get really interesting.
Mhm. I do like looking at it from a product diversification perspective in here. I'm glad you laid it out that way. I was gonna lead the witness a little bit if you hadn't, and I didn't have to. Um, but I have also seen these trends that to me seem moderately predictable. There will be some variables that change, of course, in every market, but in each state and frankly in each country that I've looked at, there seems to be an evolution of this discussion where it always starts out with THC, then it starts to look at this bifurcation between rec or medical and which way are we going to go, and then within that these different product groups and that kind of thing. But that's purely anecdotal on my part. Rachel, when you're looking at your clients' growth curves, does there seem to be substance behind that idea, or are we just sort of, am I just seeing trends that I want to see because I want to pretend like I'm smart? Like, what are you seeing in terms of product diversification and how people are viewing the growth of these markets?
Well, I guess what I would say is I work mainly in the cannabis THC market. That's what I
Yep.
work in, and that's what I've historically worked in for over a decade. So coming into the non-THC market is definitely new for me and for a lot of my clients, to be honest. But what I am seeing is some of my cannabis operators, brands across the US, I'll speak about specifically, they are diversifying and they are thinking about other ways to maximize production. Say, for example, in the California market, it's a very saturated market on the cannabis side, but that now they're looking to potentially diversify, right? And so
Mhm.
I think people are looking to capture markets that they haven't thought about before, and they're actually starting to think about it. Um, so I guess that's
Yeah.
all I can say on that side. Yeah.
Yeah, and
One thing that
one
I've
thing, but hang
yeah,
on just a
sure.
sec, because I'll lose this if I don't think it. One thing I can say is a lot of these THC dominant companies for a long time, especially in the US market when I'm looking at the
Mhm.
edible sector, um, the combinations now of it's THC and CBN, THC and CBG, and combining those effects and then marketing to that um, does seem to be, to me, a great evolution in business because we're no longer just driving to the lowest price for the highest concentration of THC. It's kind of like sophistication in wine, right? The more sophisticated people get, they start looking for different mixes and terpenes and all that, which is very similar to what we end up talking about in cannabis. And um, I think that just bodes well for the future, although not great for current marketing campaigns. So, anyway, what were you gonna say, Beau?
Well, when you talk about product diversification, usually these new markets start off heavily influenced by flower and pre-rolls. And so that's a majority of the sales in a new market. And then as the delivery mechanisms evolve and are offered, then you have less flower sales and more what I call derivative sales. And so that's the product diversification within these new markets that occur. But then you also have um, uh, different applications and different use cases, different consumer archetypes. And so people will use cannabinoids differently depending upon what ails them or what effect that they intend to have. And so I think that's where the product diversification question comes in. It's like, what is the consumer archetype that you're going after? And one
Mhm.
other thing is I've developed these models where I can tell, based upon the demand and the ramp scenarios and all this stuff, how much legal participation there is in the market, but then also what opportunities there are and how many licenses there are required for cultivation and processing, product manufacturing, and retail. One of the, in my opinion, one of the most untapped markets from a product diversification is this product manufacturing sector. You have a lot of cultivation out there. You've got plenty of supply of biomass. You've got a lot of retail outlets, some say in some markets too much. But then right in that sweet spot, you've got product manufacturing, and you can run a very profitable, very lucrative business, multi-million-dollar a year in revenue off of between 250 and 500 pounds of biomass. That's all it takes. And so you have this huge opportunity to have a viable business, but you have to understand the customer that you're going after. Takes a little
Mhm.
bit of research, takes a lot of data.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, in this industry, we've always relied on relationships, right? And so that's how I see the diversification also manifesting is through these relationships. And as these conversations are starting to happen, people are leveraging their relationships to say, hey, maybe you're a good, I don't know, cultivator or manufacturer using the non-THC type products, and let's ally with each other and let's try to get more of the market share, because then you're not dealing with, cross state line issues, and um, it's farm bill as opposed to 280E and or federal, regulations and restrictions.
Yeah.
Developing those relationships,
Mhm.
that's really key, right? Developing a relationship between supplier and consumer. I mean, that's really critical. And right now in the US market, on the adult use and medical side, you're limiting the type of relationships that you can have to only those that go into dispensaries. And so the dispensary model, in our opinion, is a failed model because it's limiting the growth and trajectory of the overall regulated market, and it caps off the relationships that you have to provide that research and development, and to understand the consumer archetypes, many of which will never ever go into a dispensary.
So I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here, which was not on the agenda, but I got to take what you just said and play with it a little bit since we're talking about diversification within the cannabis industry. You said the dispensary model is a failed model. And I think it's the model we have. And there's certainly people that are making some money in it, and there's others that aren't. I guess an interesting question that we could go down here, and then I'll bring us back to the main topic, though, is what do we think the next model is? Like in the United States, because I can give a whole bunch of models that are working differently in different ways in other markets around the world, but the US is always going to be kind of unique because of the way it's structured. But let's just sort of speculate for a bit. Where do we think this goes? Like, if we're going to talk about 280E in a couple of episodes, we've got hemp coming up in the next episode. All of these are factors in what that future model looks like. If you had to throw a dart at a dartboard, Rachel, what do you think? What do you think happens in this next iteration?
What do I think and hope happens,
Yeah.
right? For all of my retail clients and also for the industry as a whole. I mean, certainly I think there's going to be like CVS's and 7-Elevens providing cannabis, right, in the
Mhm.
future. But I really hope that the consumer experience, that people actually encounter at dispensaries. So when I go do like site visits and I go visit some of my clients or go to dispensaries in general, I'm always affected by, in a good way, by how I feel when I walk into each one of these dispensaries and the different experience that I can have. It's like walking into a different coffee shop every time. And I realize this is a different type of product, but I really relish those experiences. And also, dispensaries are often the center of their communities. They're contributing in ways either to community funds or community activities. In New York, for example, I visited a few dispensaries, and they have a lot of art projects. They're supporting local artists. And so they have poetry nights. And so these can be the center of not just commerce, but also of culture and bringing the communities together. And I think in today's society where people are lacking, community, it can actually be a center and a hub for community. So I would say doubling down on that as opposed to just solely trying to sell products, is a way to keep the dispensary model vital.
Mhm.
Yeah, and just to supplement that, I think that ultimately the dispensaries will be the Apple stores of cannabis. They'll have greater product diversity, as well as the social aspect of that, which is being regulated out of the system right now. You're regulating out social, anything associated with cannabis. But I do ultimately think that there'll be your generic brands, and the ones that are meant for widespread appeal, and those will be distributed outside of the dispensary model. And then the dispensaries will be more the specialty shops and those that cater to the local community rather than the broader market.
Yep. Yeah, it's it's an interesting thing to contemplate. I would guess as well that I agree with you both. I think there is I always have looked at it through sort of the beer lens as much as anything, because you've got, you know, the Budweisers and the Coors that you sell mass produced, and then I love going to my local craft brew place and hanging out and talking to people and talking about the details of the product and all that. And then you have, you know, these other things where people are doing their own thing and they're making their own, and I always enjoy that. But I think we also will inevitably have this medical pharmaceutical layer, which doesn't really account for any of that in here as research continues to expand, and we really start digging into all of these new opportunities that exist with very sophisticated medicinal products. Actually, along those lines, and bring it back, I'm going to do a plug for pub7.org, which is a cannabis research online library, free to access, that one of our GCNC members, Medocan, put together. And I really like it because it starts to highlight sort of all of the diverse applications that exist within this plant for different medical use and all that, outside of just the recreational discussion we're having as well. And when you start digging into that kind of research and you look at how deep this goes, whatever happens next is going to be happening on 4 or 5 different levels. And it's going to be really looking at regulating to end use and how people are interacting with the plant, as opposed to all of this other sort of, I don't know, false walls that we built around these sectors. So I wanted to bring that up also because I wanted to ask you both, when we're looking at sort of the growth of this marketplace, we're talking about the diverse cannabinoids that are existing, the different product use cases that we're seeing. What do we see happening in the bifurcation between medical and recreational? Is that going to continue to exist? What is the end game in the US in particular, in your minds, for the medical aspect? Because in Europe, it's so cut and dry, right? And in the European markets and Australia, for example, it's very clean. You know what the medical market looks like, you know how to operate in it, and rec is sort of this side thing in some places. The US is completely inverted. But we know the medical aspects are coming in, that research is there, and part of the discovery of all these cannabinoids is driving that. So what do you guys see as the future trends, especially in the US, around the medical aspect of this business? Beau, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So I think that, you know, a lot of the public policy folks will defer to the pharma model because it's predictable and it's something that they're familiar with. It doesn't necessarily work all that well with, you know, a plant, you know, a botanical, because it's a complex in nature. And so there's going to be multiple channels that have different focuses. You're going to have a pharma, you're going to have a medical or a botanical, you'll have a wellness, you'll have the intoxicating side, and then you'll have the illicit channels. And so, you know, that's kind of the reality of the situation. I think right now, where the regulators want to take it is they have explicitly said that they are only focused on public safety and not on market growth or market development. And so that's their default, but
It's also bull. I mean, come on. That's not a chance in hell, that's true. But fine, I just had to interject there on
No,
that one.
that's coming explicitly from regulators. And so,
Yeah, that's fine. I just don't believe it. There's not a single person I know in the regulation side, the government side, anywhere that doesn't at some point want to understand like how it all affects monetary policy for whoever their elected bosses are. That's just my opinion. But
so the regulators are looking at public safety.
mhm.
The legislators are looking at revenue. And so I think that's how things are separated, right?
It's supposed to be. Yes. I'm just not sure if that is completely true. But we'll let that stand. You're right, Beau. That's how it should be, and I think some of them do that. But if you look at, would you consider the FDA a regulator?
Well, not quite yet, but they should be.
Okay, right, right. But I think they're just as worried about monetary policy as anything else. Nonetheless, we'll let that sit there because it's not really the
But I
point.
think that the bottom line though is that there's going to be a handful of different channels that are servicing a
Mhm.
handful of different consumer archetypes, and
Yeah,
it's not one of those things that's a one size fits all. And
yeah.
I think that's how it's going to evolve.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of trends moving into that wellness space that you listed, right? Like it's
Mhm.
not medical, it's not recreational, but that health and wellness space seems to be getting a lot of traction. And especially in states like California, Rachel, I've seen, and frankly in Colorado as well, which have large, expansive sort of wellness cultures embedded into them.
Mhm.
That seems to be a hotbed of potential growth for the industry, similar to what we saw with natural products. Um, I don't know if you've seen that as well, Rachel. I'm not in California very often, but that's, what I hear chatter about.
I mean, it's ingrained in our California blood out here. So yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely. Hmm.
So, I wanted to dig into a question that I've heard pop up a couple of times in the last couple of weeks around capital funding. I bring it up each episode because it's always a hot topic. Are we seeing diversification of capital being deployed against businesses that seem to be doing product diversification, or are we still looking at investment going primarily into um, companies that have a singularly defined product?
I work in the THC space mainly.
Hmm.
But I think, I have a few clients that are going into the non-THC space, and they're injecting their own personal capital into
Hmm.
these projects. So, um,
And when you say non-THC space, what are they
mhm.
looking at? Is that like hemp beverage? Is that something else?
CBD products,
Okay.
I'm not sure exactly what type of CBD products they're looking at, but um, it's a way for them to access other state markets. I don't think they're getting into beverages yet, at least the ones that I work with. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
On the investment side, um, some are straddling both sides of that THC fence. One
Mhm.
is because they can get a greater access to capital, arguably, um, with fewer hurdles. And
Mhm.
and so I think that's the appeal of if you're servicing similar customers and you can get access to capital and you can deploy products and you can ship them all over the country versus within just a select jurisdiction, then there's an appeal to that.
Yeah.
And I think part of the investment side is de-risking. There's a certain level of risk associated with investing in cannabis. It's kind of a high risk, low return type of industry right now, in general. Whereas hemp and that side of the THC fence is lower risk, low return, but at least it's lower risk. And there's upside potential in it because of the fact that you have a larger potential market because you can go to 50 different states and then international.
Yeah, in the next episode, we're going to talk about that a little bit, and I want to dive in there to whether or not the de-risking, also does limit the opportunity, whereas even with things like 280E and all of these restrictions on the THC side, if the upside potential there is still larger, having, an expert deep on that side of the business with Rachel and your background in hemp, I think we'll be able to get into quite a lot on that next one about where is the real opportunity. Are they both great opportunities? It's just different challenges. I'm looking forward to diving into that one on the next episode.
We mentioned California, right? And wellness versus higher THC. Just a couple little mini facts. About a quarter to a third of all dispensary sales in California are tourism related. And there's about $5 billion in cannabis wellness tourism that has nothing to do. It's outside of the dispensary system, 5 billion. So when you add those together, it's a $6.8 billion market. The total market for higher THC in California is $6.7 billion. So the wellness and the canna tourism is roughly the same size as the entire cannabis market, the higher THC side. So that shows the influence of these wellness marketplaces and how this is a relatively, although it's already established, it's a relatively unknown and untapped area that is ripe for expansion and opportunity.
Yeah,
Right.
That's great. And as we look at those products that are driving it, I think in regulations come down to block them. Every place that I go now, people are always asking me, and I am not the guy they should be asking, like, for what's the right product for this health ailment, or if I want to do this, or if I want to think clearer, or any of those. And all of that leads straight into what you're saying, right? People are looking for non-pharmaceutical health options to help them live better, feel healthier, and all of that. I think the opportunities there in that space are enormous.
And I think we should also look at, say brands, for example, diversifications of a brand. So if you want brand exposure, how do you get to market first, with your brand in an easier way? So if you wanted to go with a non-THC type brand in a new market, that's a great way to start diversifying your brand portfolio too.
That's a total nugget that you just dropped, man. That's an awesome comment because some of the MSOs went into markets with a non-high THC product just to establish their brand and then expanded in as the market evolved. And so that's just a truth bomb, man. That's awesome.
So we had two really good ones today with that one, and Beau, your comment earlier on the manufacturing opportunity that exists for spaces. I think across the board, people often think of just, again, THC products or THC with another cannabinoid, and they're thinking about that end use product. They're not looking at the totality of the supply chain and the opportunities that exist within all of it. And that's why we have you guys on this series each time, because we get lots of truth bombs for folks. So and we've been efficient at keeping these right at about 30 minutes, and we're getting right up to that. So just before we close this out, like, any last thoughts on this topic of product diversification, what people might be looking at in terms of future trends, anything to close us out? Rachel, why don't you start?
Yeah, I'd say this kind of comes back to your business plan, right? And really looking at your business plan and deciding what your go-to-market, your product strategy is, and things like that. So I think making those plans can help inform your decision on whether or not you want to diversify. And when we talked about, like, say, dispensaries, for example, what's the future of dispensaries? Well, some folks that I see are diversifying out of that a little bit, just a hedge, right? So I think hedging is also very important if you're a business owner.
Yeah.
I think, a lot of the conversations I've had recently, be it in France, Iceland, even in Southern Oregon recently, have had to do with the altruistic nature and the focus on wellness and health. And I think that one thing that we've kind of often overlooked, unfortunately, is the medical side of this and and helping people out that are suffering. And I think that by understanding your consumers and having an awareness of the community there, you can support the community, you can support and reduce the suffering from people. And I think as long as we remain focused on that, then the other successes will come about naturally.
Yep.
Love that.
I love that. And I could see that in many markets around the world. It often starts with how do we take care of the patients and how do we maintain that? Even as markets grow and product uses change, and the US has never had a real clear line for that discussion. And separating it out really was a tax discussion for the consumer as opposed to an actual product use discussion. But I think you're right, Beau. The more we look at that, and frankly, the more research comes out and the more we learn about the interaction and inside the body between all these different elements, is great. For folks who listen to Worldview regularly, we did a joint show with MM411 and Dr. Ethan Russo. We've done a few. He's gone real deep on some of these cannabinoid topics and the different sort of uses there for medical patients. His company is Credo Life Science. There's some great opportunities to learn and educate yourselves on that. So if you get a chance, check those out. Check out pub7.org also for those research opportunities. And once you are looking at the future of your business, make sure you call Rachel to help keep it on track at Verdant on the finance side, and Beau to give you what those trends are going to look like over time. So thanks everybody for listening to our series on Cannabis by the Numbers. The next one, which we've referenced, is looking at sort of the hemp space and what's going on there. I'm excited about that. It's a hot topic these days, but it's not the silver bullet that a lot of people are looking at either. So which is always the case, and why we're talking about Cannabis by the Numbers. So until next time, everybody, have a great one, and we'll see you soon. Don't forget to subscribe.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.